CISO, which I'll explain in just a moment. But my background is I started at Deloitte, spent a number of years there in the IT audit space, transitioned into cybersecurity right when it was becoming hot for the big four, and got to be a part of some really cool companies, mostly on the West Coast in the healthcare and financial services space. And then I got this unique opportunity to go work for another company in Austin, Texas, where I live, which I should have started with. I got to build a cybersecurity practice as their chief information security officer. So I was given this opportunity at a relatively young age, and I got to really just kind of not make it up as I go along, but really go through a trial by fire experience of building security internally for a firm, and then also building a professional services practice for clients and anybody that we interacted with, clients and vendors. So finally, after doing that, I kind of opened my eyes one day and said, you know, if I can go build this for somebody else, I can build it for myself. And so I started the firm Eden Data. Eden Data, in a nutshell, is a cybersecurity consulting firm that helps startups and disruptive organizations build better security. So we really focus on the next generation of companies, the ones that are very technology centric, typically in the cloud or have a hybrid environment, typically a decentralized workforce, meaning they're remote. It just happened to be that COVID really sped up some things on our end because people are inherently going that direction. And I actually have a talking point about that a little bit later. But that's my background. It's enough about me. Let's get into the goods. I know everybody puts a quote out there for their slides. This one I put up here because it speaks to what we're going to be talking about today. Just because cybersecurity in general is a big problem, but especially, I apologize for the background noise, especially during a crisis, it has become a very paramount issue, and people will go and adopt technologies and download new solutions and get different, the latest and greatest AI, machine learning, but they don't realize that technology is not really the problem. It's really beyond that. So that's one thing I kind of wanted to outline before we get started. So first topic today that I'm going to talk about is how cybersecurity in general is kind of jeopardized in a crisis. So in general, anytime a world crisis happens, people take advantage of it. Unfortunately, there's all kinds of scammers out there that will do everything from spinning up charities to sending out ransomware and taking advantage of the people that potentially don't have the means to be able to fight back. And so a big part of why a crisis is so lucrative for hackers and I guess malicious intenders is basically because we're all emotional human beings, and we are operating in an emotional state when we are when our normal world is being impacted. And so it tends to be that during a crisis in general that is impacting your organization and impacting you personally, it tends to be that your brain power is going towards things that it wouldn't normally go towards. And because of that, you're not reading through all your emails. You're not making all of the smartest decisions. And it's because we're humans and we can only do so much. And then part of it is also that I think everyone can agree with, it's just overstimulation of information. You get all of these reports of what's going on, and then you have the politics that comes into it. And then your organization has to have a disaster recovery plan, and you have to be able to be pulled in on a bunch of things that you're not normally pulled in, and you quickly become overwhelmed. Which is obviously not good for you, and doubly it's lucrative for people that want to take advantage of that. So rather than just make a bunch of blanket statements, I'm going to give two examples. One of them is Hurricane Harvey. I had to use this one because I'm in Texas, got to see this one firsthand. Very beginning of Hurricane Harvey, right after it happened, actually even before it happened, you started seeing the charity scams. There were phone calls, emails, all kinds of folks that were setting up actual outside of stores and taking money for these quote unquote charities. And so I know this doesn't seem like something that would really pertain to cybersecurity, but what we saw in Hurricane Harvey specifically was a huge influx in these false charities that were taking advantage of folks during their time when a particular few states was getting hit pretty hard, and the majority of the other states wanted to help out any way they could. Another big issue with it was that phishing scams, this was really a good test bed for the modern day hacker to figure out how easy it was to set up phishing scams during this crisis, because we were receiving so many emails that were legitimately from good organizations, that were from our own organizations, making announcements on the current state of affairs. And so we just kind of got overwhelmed as a population to these phishing scams that would otherwise we would have caught. And so Hurricane Harvey just had a huge uptick in cyber security incidents. Now, to take a completely different example, let's talk about NotPetya. Surprisingly, NotPetya is not a disaster in itself. NotPetya was a ransomware attack that kicked off in 2016. It was based on another form of ransomware, Petya, that was created and didn't cause nearly as much disruption. But essentially, NotPetya was designed as a form of malware to attack a country that was already in dire straits, that country being the Ukraine. So the speculations are out there about what country was behind it. My vote is on Russia, but basically they had seen an opportunity to take advantage of a country that was already going through economic crisis. They were already going through other past cybersecurity attacks, lack of funding. They had just a really economic crisis pretty much sums it up perfectly. So they issued a ransomware attack on a few select Ukraine companies, but the problem is it quickly became out of control. And so NotPetya became a ransomware attack that replicated itself very quickly. And what ended up happening was some of those Ukraine companies ended up being service providers for companies around the world, including multi-billion-dollar organizations. And so those companies inherently had connections to IT systems for other companies, and it was just the domino effect. And so again, you've got this crisis going on, a lot of people saying a lot of things, a lot going on, and it became a uncontrollable situation that ended up causing billions of dollars in economic damage, put a bunch of companies out of business, and really took advantage of what has inherently become a huge problem across the world, which is a lack of robust cybersecurity. So that is a crisis in general, but let's talk about COVID specifically, because COVID is a bit unprecedented in that everything I just talked about was kind of maximized. And so the first thing that we've seen from COVID is that the entire world was impacted. The other two examples that I gave, Hurricane Harvey technically just hit a couple southern states in the US. NotPetya only hit select companies around the world, but COVID has impacted the entire world. Everybody is freaking out about COVID. There is so much news and information going around. We don't even know what COVID-19 is, let alone all of the associated factors that go into this pandemic. And so first and foremost, it has created mayhem across the world. We all had to pivot both personally and professionally. We're all overwhelmed because we've been cooped up like animals for the last 6 months. And so this really opened the door for a lot of malicious hackers across the world. And so it ended up creating a lot of easy targets. There are these malicious intenders that have figured out how easy it is to spin up a phishing attack or a malware attempt. And you couple that with what I just talked about, where people's heads are not in the right place. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel. So, and to give you perspective, I mean, malware these days, you can purchase malware with customer service support on the black market these days for between $150 and $500. And so if you think about that barrier to entry, it's just, you couple that with things like the fact that otherwise great people out there suddenly became, they started facing dire straits and maybe started making decisions that weren't the best decisions from an ethical standpoint. Then you've got the people that were already considered malicious intenders and trying to create havoc via malware attempts and phishing and hacking in general. And so you've got all of these pieces of the puzzle that come together perfectly for the bad side. And then you finally add in the fact that we as a society globally are just so far behind when it comes to security. You would be pretty shocked. I know a lot of the folks on this webinar are getting into the cybersecurity professional for the first time. You would be pretty shocked at how few companies have robust security in place. To give you a little bit of perspective, the Fortune 500, top 500 companies of the US economy and beyond, they only 40% have a CISO as of last year. And so that's like having a big ship without any captain. And so If you think that only 40% of the Fortune 500 have a CISO, imagine what about the entire landscape, the entire business landscape in the US alone, let alone beyond that. And so with COVID, unfortunately, it has created such havoc, for lack of a better term, across the world that people are getting hit in their personal lives and professionally. So cyber attacks were up 1,200% just in the first 2 weeks of COVID alone. The statistics are through the roof. I won't throw a bunch of numbers at you now because they're speculating all sorts of stuff. But the average data breach size that was about 2 million last year has jumped up to almost 4 million this year. So that's for any size company having to face a breach, a data breach. And you have to realize that there's just so many factors that go into it beyond the legal fees, beyond contacting your customers. There's the brand damage. And so it has just become a disaster in general for many companies out there. And unfortunately, because our news is so inundated with politics and health related information, you're not hearing about this sort of thing. And so we do hear about a couple of things, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But one of the big examples is Twitter. Everyone saw the Twitter breach last week. That was a situation where 3 individuals, they don't currently have all the information, but it's led to believe that at least one of them didn't have any kind of criminal history. They started to make decisions based on their financial situation that could have created a huge detriment to our society. And so COVID was pretty dark when it came to cybersecurity and compliance in general. But that's enough about all the negative stuff. So let's talk about why everybody's on this call and why we should be talking about cybersecurity as it relates to a world crisis in the first place, because there is tremendous opportunity in the security space. All of these things that I just listed out for you are problems, but every problem has a solution. And I'm going to talk about kind of my perspective. Of course, it's my 2 cents, but I think that there is tremendous opportunity both for the professionals that are already in the security space and those that have a passion for security and want to get into it. So the first thing that I want to note is that COVID has greatly sped up the timeline on cybersecurity and compliance in general. What this means is that a year ago, I'd be having conversations with clients and they didn't really have much of a care about security. They wanted to be able to maximize their profits and minimize their costs. And what they saw cybersecurity as was a cost center. But now you get into COVID and you see everything going on with people transitioning their IT environment to the remote workforce. You've got the cyber breaches galore. You've got all of the companies that are really locking down who they do business with. You add in all these factors and suddenly security is a very important topic. And so now I'm really starting to see that personally in my professional world. I know my colleagues are as well. Essentially, people are just putting a lot more stock into security. And it's for a few reasons. I think that in the end, they still want security to pay dividends. And so one of the things that I always explain to my clients is that security is not an investment where you put in $1 and you take out $2. What it is it's you put in $1 and you save yourself from losing $10. And so it's a bit of a different discussion when you're having these chats with the CEO, the CFO, the COO. You have to help them realize that security is not something that just generates revenue, but it definitely prevents you from losing revenue. And so these are the conversations that Eden Data that we have with our clients. And it's something I encourage more security professionals to be able to speak to. Another thing that we're seeing more of is regulatory requirements are increasing. Now, this wasn't necessarily created by COVID, but it was definitely sped up by COVID. And so last year and beginning of this year, you started to see a lot more data privacy regulations coming out. GDPR came out a few years ago. Everyone freaked out and then nothing happened. All of a sudden now, 2020, everyone's freaking out about GDPR again, even though it got announced 3 years ago. You've got things like California Consumer Privacy Act out in California, CCPA. That one is another very popular regulation, and that's something that popped up at the beginning of this year, and they've already started fining midway through the year in spite of a global pandemic. And so that's definitely a sign that there is more regulation to come. You've got the state of New York, they have their own regulation. All 50 states have some form of data privacy law that you have to uphold as a business. Most companies don't even know that. So a lot of these regulatory requirements, you're going to see them speeding up, and people are going to need help with them. They're going to need help navigating them, understanding them, seeing if they need to follow them in the first place. And then another huge thing that I'm seeing right now in the space is that clients are asking a lot more of their vendors. And so you've got these huge companies that have always been expecting quite a bit from their vendors. And for over the last couple of years, I would say this got exacerbated. I would have clients that had Facebook or Google as their clients. And these companies for the last couple of years have been making them take a series of security assessment questionnaires, going and answering a bunch of questions about what their security environment looks like. And so that was happening with the big enterprises, but it wasn't happening with anyone else. Now I'm starting to see that across the board. You've got a lot more companies that are expecting their vendors to have a very robust security posture, or they just won't do any business with them. There was a statistic that came out this morning that 25% of companies will not even consider doing business with a vendor that has ever had a recorded breach. So that's a huge statement. I think that shows the power of just the reputational damage or reputational potential when it comes to cybersecurity and compliance. And then I think finally, one of the things I would like to point out is we're finally starting to see this tipping point where people care about security more in their personal lives. So we've been giving away our data for years and years, and it's getting downright creepy in what they can do with our data. And I promise I won't be that tinfoil hat guy. We can do a different call for that one. But basically, you are compromising your data privacy every single time you sign up for a new service, or every time you download a new app, or you are buying a new product off the internet, sometimes even hardware. And so what we are seeing is people are finally starting to care about that. They're caring about it in some big ways, like the country of Hong Kong and how they're kind of masking their faces and covering up their identities because of the surveillance state that's going on in China. And then you've got things in the US where people are starting to delete their Facebook accounts and stop opting in for those email preferences where they're collecting your data. We removed all the Amazon Echoes out of our house. Things like that. I think we're starting to see a trend in that direction. And so all of this is very much opportunity in the space, which we will talk about specifically as it relates to security professionals on the call. So first thing I want to point out is that there has always been, for the last few years, a huge shortage of security professionals. I don't even know what the number is at this point. It's always been 7-figure number in terms of how many open positions versus how many cybersecurity professionals there are in the world. And so right now there is I guess I can't say right now in COVID, I don't know, but before COVID, there was a 0% unemployment rate in cybersecurity. And that really speaks to what cybersecurity was even before the crisis. Now you've got COVID where it's sped up even more, and there are so many security professions or job openings out there that it's not even funny. And so this creates such opportunity for professionals that are looking to get into security. And that's also if you are maybe starting your career or you're already in an existing career and wanting to transition into security. Things like IT professionals. I get asked a lot by IT professionals what they can be doing in order to get into security. So one of the big things here to point out is just in general that there is ample opportunity. I think that the other thing I want to point out to professionals that's a little bit confusing sometimes is what kind of opportunity, what kind of roles are they looking for? What kind of cybersecurity is a blanket statement. It's a blanket industry. But the cool part about this is the sky is pretty much the limit. So there is, the way I break up security is that there is the very technical role. There's going the white hat route. There's the red teaming and purple teaming and all of the technical components. There's doing web application vulnerability scans and being a network security engineer. There's all of these different technical roles that you can send yourself down a rabbit hole to kind of figure out what interests you and go for it. But then there's also this other side of security that doesn't require the technical skill set so much, although it does help, and that's risk management. So what we are coming to find is that every kind of security vulnerability and event and general, just, I guess, every security facet is tied to risk. And so every company has some form of cybersecurity risk that they're dealing with, because every company is in some form or fashion a data company. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about the flower shop down the road or a big conglomerate like Tesla. Everybody seems to be collecting data these days. And so because of that, the company has a obligation to protect that data. It requires a lot of personal information for them to collect in order to do business with their customers, and it's their obligation to protect that data. So with that, there is a ton in the risk management space that a client is required to understand in order to appropriately address risk. So let me break it down as an example. For a technical cybersecurity professional, a client is going to need penetration testing. It's an annual requirement for pretty much every security framework out there. You would be doing penetration testing both at the network level and then also at the application level for any applications that a company develops. So that's something that they would need from a technical standpoint. But let's say from a risk management standpoint, there's a slew of operational tasks that they would need. How you onboard new hires, how you offboard new hires, how often you conduct user access reviews. Do you have multi-factor authentication rolled out across your environment? These are some of the basics. There's a lot more that get technical, but all of those that I just listed, both on the technical and the risk management side, tie back to risk. And so when you can help a customer or an employer understand what their risk is and what they can do about it, you're really setting yourself up for success. So hopefully maybe I spawned some questions because I talked about a lot there and happy to answer them. But what I'm trying to outline is that there is a ton of opportunity for security professionals, no matter what your interests are. Also, another big thing that's popped up from COVID, you've seen all the ads for master classes and webinars just like this, but you've also probably seen people that are getting their certifications at a faster degree and just kind of expanding their knowledge base. That is a huge opportunity right now because now you're seeing folks transition. There's great companies like Quickstart that have already been doing this, but then there's other companies that are transitioning, colleges, for example, that are going more and more online, and that allows the barrier to entry to lower. And so now you can focus on getting certifications, you can focus on your knowledge expansion. Maybe you decide to focus on certifications instead of going to college, or maybe you decide to focus on certifications while you're operating your full-time job at home because you have a little bit more bandwidth, you've removed your commute. There's just a ton of opportunity there. I would be happy to talk about kind of the certifications that I personally believe in, the ones that I'm seeing the most traction in. But at the end of the day, there's just a ton of time and opportunity for you to kind of add pedigree to your profile and to your reputation without necessarily having the direct experience. So that's one thing I didn't mention, but I think is important to say is that you don't have to have real world industry experience to go get a certification. But those certifications are going to really help enhance your chances of landing that real world experience opportunity. And then finally, one thing I'd love to point out is just new business opportunities. So I listed for entrepreneurs. I probably should have left off those last two words because I'm going to give more examples than just for entrepreneurs. I'll talk about this both from if you work for someone and if you are looking to work for yourself. I'll talk about it from both sides. So first, I'll start from the entrepreneur standpoint. There are a ton of business opportunities because of everything I talked about. One, the pie keeps getting bigger and bigger. So even if there are 100 companies, there are at least 100 companies out there that do consulting work for cybersecurity. There is still plenty of opportunity because there are so many businesses that don't have security in place. And so going and building a consulting firm or going and doing a service where you're doing pen tests at the domain level where you can do that from your couch, there's a ton of opportunity. And some that I'd like to point out are brand yourself. If you don't know brand yourself, you should definitely check it out. It's essentially they started before COVID, of course, but they've really pivoted in COVID. It's essentially a way to protect your identity online. And so they do that from a number of ways. They take it from a security standpoint, so making sure that your accounts are not compromised and that folks aren't posting on your behalf on your Facebook Bangladesh, but they are also taking it from a reputational standpoint. So they'll scan your Facebook for, I guess, for controversial posts, and they'll look for through your Google search history when you type in your name and see what comes up and help you rank those things to only be positive. There's just a lot of cool things that they're doing, and it's really taken off because of COVID. Living Security is a more technical solution. So they are another company that operates in the cybersecurity space, but more on the hardware network side. So they're doing a lot more on the network security space, and they're taking off in COVID as well. And then finally, I put Eden Data here, not to make a plug for my company, but to show you that I actually started Eden Data right at the beginning stages of COVID. And so I could have made every excuse, and I tried honestly to make every excuse to keep a paycheck and to just kind of keep my head down before I go and start this idea that I wanted to pursue. But I decided to kind of jump in on the deep end, and I'm so glad that I did, because even for a brand new company, there has been so much cybersecurity opportunity out there that we've been able to secure a lot of clients that need help with their security. And like I said at the beginning of this bullet point, I know that there are a lot of competitors in a lot of spaces, and there's a lot of competitors in the cybersecurity space, but there is so much opportunity in cybersecurity that it's fine. There are absolutely so many businesses out there that you could never possibly get in front of them all. And that's the beauty of cybersecurity. We essentially live in the Wild West right now when it comes to security. So I talked about entrepreneur side. Let's talk about real quick on the business side. So I know that Quick Start has a wide base, a wide diversity of professionals that have either just started their cybersecurity careers, haven't even started it and are kind of interested. Some folks might be in college or just got out of college. Other folks might have a full-time job already doing something completely different. Maybe you're technical, maybe you're not. Right now, there is a ton of opportunity for you to kind of, for lack of a better term, fake it until you make it into security. You are working for companies right now, or serving companies in some capacity, most likely, in order to pay your bills and wanting to get into security. But those companies likely do not have robust security in place. It is safe to say that for most of the people on this call, your company doesn't have any formal security strategy in place to speak of. And so what that does is that gives you the opportunity to kind of step up to the plate, start having conversations with your managers, start having conversations with leadership if you have access to them, start giving recommendations. You can go so many different directions here. Easy example, if you're not doing cybersecurity awareness training, research cybersecurity awareness training for 15 minutes, come up with a price profile for KnowBe4 or Hook Security, or gosh, there's so many and I can't even think of all their names, but getting an example and saying, I think we should do this, here's why, here's the pricing. It puts you in front of leadership. It shows that you are making a positive impact on the company that you work for, and it starts to inherently transition you into a security role. So quick shout out to the IT professionals too. IT professionals that are wanting to get into security, you're already halfway there. It's just a natural progression because as an IT professional, pretty much everything you do has to have some form of security with it. But if you're not a security professional, you don't know anything about security, but you want to get into security, this is the perfect time for you to make an impact in other ways. I would start by focusing on that knowledge expansion that I talked about, picking up a few of the latest and greatest cybersecurity frameworks out there. One of them is NIST, NIST, Cybersecurity Framework. They also have NIST 171. That's a very popular one. The Center for Internet Security, CIS, has the top 20 critical control areas. Pick up those frameworks. They're free online, and just read them a few times. I know it's going to be like watching paint dry, but you're going to be able to figure out an outline of threats that impact any organization from a high level, why it's a threat, and then sometimes, depending on the framework, it has an outline of what a company can do about it in general terms. So once you read through those a few times and you start to understand the language and the abbreviations and the acronyms, then you can start to feel like you can more eloquently speak to it. And then you can start to talk to maybe you have a security team that you can go interact with on your free time and start offering suggestions or figuring out what y'all are doing internally for security. But chances are you don't have a security team. And that's an even better opportunity because you can start making suggestions on the basics. start with something like the CIS Critical 20 and start on just the very basic level 1 controls. There are things like gathering all your assets and creating an asset inventory list. That does not require rocket science. That's a fancy way of saying understanding everything that your company owns, from hardware like a laptop or a server, or software like Slack and G Suite. And you put it in an Excel spreadsheet and you keep track of that. And every time you add a new asset, you add that to the list. Every time you remove one, you remove it. Little things like this may seem so monotonous and obvious to the folks on this call, but I promise you, most companies are not doing it. And so these are really some tremendous opportunities out there for folks to really be able to get involved and to start making an impact on the security for the companies they work for currently. So with that, I know I talked fast. I talked about a lot of things. I want to make sure I leave the last bit of this call for questions. And so thank you very much for taking the time. We'll talk at the end, of course, about how you can contact me. But are there any questions that were submitted? Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that I'm monitoring the. I'll take a look.
It's a great session, Jada. That's a great session, Jada. I was saying that was a great session, and thank you very much for that. And we will now open up for the questions. So please feel free to share your questions on the chat or on the Q&A session.
I did see a couple of the chat because I'm sharing my screen. There we go. Hold on just a sec. All right. Yeah, thank you all for the questions. We've got at least 3 in here. Let me just read these real quick. Yeah, so one person had asked essentially for these folks that don't have any IT experience, they don't have necessarily an IT background, and they're looking for a career change into cybersecurity and compliance. You've completed your boot camps, you've completed your certifications, what you can do based on the knowledge that you have. But the question is, will you still be able to get a job? Because a lot of people in COVID have lost their jobs. There's a huge unemployment issue across the world, especially in the US. And it's a great question. So firstly, I guess the way I'll be transparent. I mean, I don't think that anything is guaranteed by any means, but I will say that from what I'm seeing on my end, most of the clients are not cutting their security budget in any way because they know what is going on because of COVID and the vulnerabilities that are being taken advantage of in light of COVID. And so there have been, I'm connected with a lot of security colleagues, connected with a lot of recruiters, and there are still plenty of companies out there looking for security experience. You touched on actually a really good point though, and that's I don't have the relevant experience, that real world experience. And that's a hard obstacle to overcome. I think you made a step in the right direction by going and getting certifications and going through boot camps and really trying to update your knowledge on that. I think that there are opportunities for you to, there are plenty of entry-level security positions out there. Unfortunately, I know recruiters are notorious for this. They'll put on there that they're looking for 40 years experience for an entry-level position, and it's just insane. But what I'm seeing personally is that there are a lot of IT and security entry-level positions. So security analyst is like a big, I guess, a big opening that I've seen lately, but just IT help desk support, IT admins, those sorts of roles. Sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would like for y'all to broaden your horizons in terms of how you look at it. If you're not getting any traction in security specifically, try going for an IT role and really molding yourself into a security professional from that IT role. I guarantee from that standpoint, you're going to have such a good chance of taking over security responsibilities and putting yourself in a more leadership position pretty early on. So I have had multiple colleagues, multiple people that I've advised that have done this exact thing. Another great thing that you can do is do some freelance consulting. So there's a lot of great freelancer sites out there. And there's also like job posting sites that post freelance opportunities. So like Indeed.com, Upwork, there are companies that get on there and they post about needing part-time security help, and they'll put on there very specifically what they're looking for. And so with those, you can typically read up, kind of teach yourself whatever framework that they're trying to align themselves with, and then submit your resume for those things, but knowing that you don't have the experience necessarily that they might be looking for, set your price lower. One of the big things that I did early on was I had to do a few projects that were kind of test beds. And so I made almost no money on them, but I was able to get one, the experience, and two, the network, and three, I was able to add to my portfolio that I now have these clients. And so I guarantee you that for some of the companies out there that don't have the budget to throw towards security, and they're limited on their budget in general, you have opportunity to kind of almost volunteer yourself to help them with their security and use that as a means to building your brand. And if I didn't answer the question appropriately, go ahead and clarify, and I'll come back to it. But that's kind of my 2 cents on how you would secure a job in a pandemic, in COVID-19, if you don't have the IT background. So another question in here is, what do you recommend I do if I'm an IT professional that's trying to get into security? So kind of briefed, I've just kind of brushed over this, so I apologize. So I'm glad that someone put it back in the comments. If you are an IT professional and you're trying to get into security, the very first thing you can do is start to talk with management about things that you want to implement in your IT environment related to security. So I'm just going to use a very basic example. If you work for a hospital and you're in their IT department, taking on the HIPAA regulation, which has been in effect for years and years, taking that, reading through it, you will know firsthand what your company is and is not doing. And so you'll very quickly pick up on where your gaps are. You're almost conducting an informal gap analysis at that point. Come up with a list of a few things that you feel like you could do. Let's take an easy one, multi-factor authentication. There's so many great services out there, from Duo Security to Okta to LastPass, that you can get multi-factor implemented across the organization. So you would sit down with your manager and say, hey, I would love to get us enabled on multi-factor. This is what it would cost. These are the systems that I think are critical to our organization, meaning we can't operate without them. These are the ones I want to focus on first. Doing things like that, where you're actually taking action, I promise you, most of the IT professionals that you work with don't have much know-how or knowledge in the security space. And so you're going to look like a guru just by doing that. And so from that point, you do the easy stuff, and then you focus on the more advanced stuff. Keep read through the HIPAA, find a few more. Maybe you don't even do HIPAA. Maybe you go beyond that to something like the NIST cybersecurity framework, and focus on that, and focus on continuing to implement. And from there, you now have a real world experience with a real company where you've done security. You can either secure a promotion, you can look for other job opportunities, and then claim what you got to do as part of your job responsibilities at your current company. That is the easiest way that you can start to build that pedigree. And then how to transition to security from a non-IT career is another question that came across. This is a great question as well. I think that for the folks that did not come from IT, first thing you do is look in the mirror and ask yourself, do I like IT? Do I like technical? Or do I prefer to stay more on like the strategic side of things, the operational side of things, the managerial side of things? Figure that out, because that's going to really be your compass in determining what you do next. And so from that point, let's take it from both sides. If it's technical, I would start by going through something like OWASP, OWASP as in Paul, top 10 critical vulnerabilities. It's a very technical resource to kind of outline what a lot of applications out there have in terms of vulnerabilities. Memorizing those and seeing if you can talk to your development team, and seeing if you can kind of maybe talk through what you are and are not doing at your organization. See if you can help them and support them in that manner. If you're not technical and you don't want to be technical, this is where you focus on something like those frameworks I was talking about. NIST cybersecurity framework, CIS Critical 20. and you start to take on the same approach that I talked about with the IT profession. You alter it slightly in that because you're not in IT, you're likely not able to help with IT stuff. You may be able to. You might be able to go talk to the IT professionals and see if you can't moonlight a little bit. But one of the big things you can do is focus on the operational controls. So we'll go back to my HIPAA or my hospital example. For a hospital that is required to adhere to HIPAA, there are a variety of controls in there that have nothing to do with technology. For example, you have to designate a HIPAA privacy officer. You have to have an annual user access review of everybody that has access to your critical systems. Those things don't require any kind of technical know-how, but they're very strategic. I would very much recommend that you focus on the more operational controls in those frameworks and then see if you can help within your existing organization. That is one of the best ways that you can do it. I guess the other way that I would recommend for either the IT professional or non-IT professional is figure out if you want to keep working for the company that you're working for, or if there's not an option for you to ever enhance their security. If you hit that block in the road, then this is when you start to build out your knowledge and then focus making sure that you are not contractually breaking any laws here, but focusing on freelance, focusing on picking up some side clients, doing some basic domain scans for clients, like starting to contact clients. There's services online, both free and premium, but they don't cost much, where you can do a scan on a URL. So you'd go to edendata.co, our website, and it will output a scan and showcase all the vulnerabilities that that website has. And then you can go and contact that company and say, hey, I am a cybersecurity professional that freelances, and I notice these things. This is what I would charge to help you address them. So a lot of different directions you can go. I know that was kind of all over the place, and I will follow up on making sure that for the folks that ask those questions that you can follow up with me directly, and we can talk through that in more detail. And then we've got a question on here. I live in the UK and wanted to ask, what is the best way to get into cybersecurity? You graduated in summer of 2019 in computer science. First of all, congratulations, that's awesome. So basically, with you being a computer science major, I would assume that you're focused on technical. And so one of the best ways that you could get into cybersecurity kind of ties into what I had said previously. Start looking for those entry-level positions that are not necessarily just security centric, but maybe IT professional centric. I guarantee that if you're a computer science major, you've got a more technical know-how than the average person. And so looking for one of those maybe help desk support positions or general just IT specialist positions, and then using that as a leverage to start working with a security team if it exists, or starting to recommend security if it does not exist. One of the other big things that I would be doing is joining networks. This goes kind of for all the answers to all the questions here, but joining cybersecurity networks. There's a ton of Slack networks out there. There are a ton of Quora networks out there that all have cybersecurity professionals in there that just kind of bounce ideas off each other. There's Facebook groups too. Going in there, posting that, hey, I am a computer science major, graduated in 2019, want to get into cybersecurity. You start to have these conversations with people. Before you know it, people are going to be going out of their way to get you either resources or maybe job opportunities, or they heard about something at least. I would definitely try that route to see about getting into security. One big thing for you too, the UK question is that you were in the UK where GDPR is king or queen. And so GDPR is huge right now in the US. And so I can only imagine how big it is on your side of the fence. And so I would encourage you to go and familiarize yourself just high level with GDPR. There's a lot of great articles out there that explain GDPR in detail, understanding them, and then going and starting on looking at company websites that haven't even incorporated the I understand that you're collecting this data on me, or the folks that when you sign up with your email that you're not getting any kind of I consent to this organization collecting my data. Like those are required by law in in the European Union. And it would be advantageous for you to at least start having conversations like that if you want to familiarize yourself with the GDPR regulation. Fantastic questions. I think it's a lot of basically, how do I get into cybersecurity, whether you're non-technical or technical. And I think that one of the last, I guess, more specific tips that I'll offer is we're seeing a ton of traction in the cloud space specifically. And so it is actually pretty cheap for you to be able to go and get your cloud certifications. Far and above in the US, I'm seeing AWS and Azure. I think over in the European Union, it's more AWS and Google Cloud Platform. But regardless, looking into what it takes to start getting certified in the cloud, there are so many companies out there that are either transitioning to the cloud or have been in the cloud and just have no security to speak of. And you can learn a lot in very little amount of time. I've been putting myself through some AWS courses just to kind of brush up. And the good thing is as you do the AWS or Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and you start reading those NIST cybersecurity framework and CIS 20 frameworks that I was talking about, you're going to start to see correlation. You're going to start to see how they kind of tie to each other. You're going to start to see things almost in a different light. It's like taking that limitless pill. You're going to start seeing, you're going to read something about AWS, like identity access management. And you're going to say, oh my goodness, that ties to new hires and terminations and user access reviews. And the risk of this is unauthorized access to critical systems. So you'll start to see things like that. And it'll all kind of start coming together. So I would encourage you to focus on cloud specifically if I were to pick one avenue, because right now it's so easy to get certified and to get well acquainted with cloud environments. All right, so let's make sure. Oh, I got more questions here. Oh, great question. You teed this up perfectly. Sorry, I didn't see it before. The question is, do you think a combination of cloud computing and cybersecurity is interrelated, and will it help in terms of job perspective? Absolutely. I think that the last part of your question on will it help in terms of job perspective, it will depend on the company, of course. If you have a company that is very much on-prem, managing their own data center, has their legacy developed applications, then it's probably not going to help you much there unless they're thinking about going to the cloud. I've got a client right now that is planning on migrating to the cloud soon, and they're looking to fill positions that for folks that have cloud experience. Even though their IT environment might be in one manner right now, they are looking to evolve it and are looking to hire for that. And so that's a good example of focusing on the future instead of the past. I would really encourage you to focus on cloud computing and tying it to cybersecurity, especially if you're a technical savant, if you love being technical. One thing I keep saying that, you know, whether you love or don't love technical, but I didn't give you my perspective. I am not technical. I have inherently learned a lot from being exposed to a lot of client environments, but I was never the person that went and pursued a career in hacking or in pen testing and watching Mr. Robot every time anytime and being like, I want to be like that. It wasn't me. I was very much on the strategy side. And so the cool part about that is I love being in conversations with C-suites across an organization and helping them understand, well, by putting money or putting resources towards security, this is what it's going to produce for you. And this is how it's going to impact the business as a whole. And this is how it's going to land you more clients. I love having conversations like that. So that's kind of my 2 cents on my technical background versus not. But the person that asked the question about cloud computing and cybersecurity, you ask yourself that same question, but just know that regardless of if you want to be technical or not, there's opportunity for you to be in cloud computing and cybersecurity regardless. So there are a lot of strategic elements that go into building a cloud environment, and there's a lot of technical elements. So if you want to go technical, I would very much focus on AWS or Azure security offerings specifically, and that will help you to also learn and brush up on cybersecurity. So what I mean by that is, with AWS, it has a billion tools out there, but only focus on things like CloudWatch, Cloud Trail, Shield, Macy. They have all these great tools that are very security centric. start to become acquainted with those, and that'll kind of skyrocket your experience. All right, and then let's make sure. Oh, and I'm sorry, I didn't actually mark all these as, let me make sure I didn't miss anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I marked as like answered. But if you go to the answered section,
Nope.
you can. Yep.
No, that's perfect. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing any questions. So I think we touched on all of these, but for the folks that did submit the question, we still have time. So if I didn't answer your question and you'd like to add clarity, or I spawned more questions, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to talk through it. But one statement I'll make before people start signing off too is just that, first of all, again, thank you for taking the time out of your day. That means a lot to me. And I love to see people that are dedicating their time to getting into security. Please, if you need anything, that's my email, that's my LinkedIn profile. Would love for you to add me and connect with me anytime you have questions. On my side, we have cybersecurity professionals that we stay connected with. I'm part of groups and trying to always stay plugged in. So if you need anything, just holler.
Thank you so much, Taylor. That was an epic session, a great session. I'm already a fan, and I'm not exaggerating.
That
Thank
means
you.
a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone else, for joining this session. You can feel free to reach out to Taylor if you have any questions, or if if you like to be under his mentorship. I'm pretty sure he'll be more than happy to help you guys. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at quickstart or at quickstart.com, or you can reach out to bootcampsales@quickstart.com, and we will be emailing you the registration links, the invite for the upcoming webinar. So please feel free to join. And thank you very much, and be safe. And once again, Taylor, thank you for taking out the time.
Yes, thank you to Quick Start for hosting me. Thank you so much for giving me the platform. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to hearing from y'all.
Thank you.
I'll hang out too, just to make sure.
All right. Thank you. We'll end the session now.
Thank you so much. You take care.
You too, Taylor. Bye.